Yes, indeed, we're back. I'm your host, Koku. This is the Bitter Medicine Podcast. It's a Tuesday evening at 8 Eastern Standard Time, 2 minutes late. We're going to be reading a paper tonight that is all about African music and its retention in the quote-unquote new world. It's by a guy who I came upon years ago, actually, when I was studying African music, back when I was studying that. There's a Nigerian brother named Lazarus. I think they call him Laz for short. Ekwueme. He's still alive too, from what I understand. He's still alive. So we're gonna read this paper from this brother. African music retentions in the new world. Just want to remind you guys, Saturday Shoot the Breeze happens every Saturday, unless something comes up. Every Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you guys tune into that. It's always a good time. We have folks who give their time to help post topics, to help discuss them, and it's only right that we have a decent audience to do it. So I would like you guys to tell all your friends. When you see it come up on Instagram, on IG, on the Discord, share the link. On Twitter, share the link. Let's get this. Let's add a zero. You know, that's how I live my life. Every year I try. I'm not always successful, but every year I have the outlook I want to, or at least every few years I have the outlook of, let me add a zero to how much money I make. Let's do the same thing with this show. We've been doing Shoot the Breeze now almost a year. Let's try to add a zero to the numbers that we get now. Let's try and make it bigger. Anyway, so you know, you see the title of the paper. You see the artwork for the show. That artwork is from Junkanu, a Bahamian art form. Let's read this paper. And what I'm going to do now is start the show officially. And on the other side, we will read this paper.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. Just want to remind you guys before we get the show rolling that this show is part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. There are other shows on the network you are invited to tune into.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed, we're back. We are back. By the way, before I start the paper, just let me remind you guys that we do have the community tab up on YouTube. And with the community tab, I tend to put up questions of the day, quotes, announcements of upcoming episodes, etc. But the community tab is something that, you guys can interact with me even more over there. As a matter of fact, let me share some. Should I do that? Let me check something for you real quick. So I put up a question of the day yesterday, and only a few people responded to it, but I appreciate it still. And I think it's a nice way of having discussions outside of podcasting all the time. So I put up this question yesterday, and if you guys are here with me live, you could answer on the community tab or in the chat or down in the comment section. Question of the day: when the word African comes up, what do you think of first or most? And I got to give a shout out to Jay, who's become a regular now on Shoot the Breeze. Jay responded. Let me so I could pull that up. Jay responded, as well as Global Black African Empowerment responded. Jay's answer to the question, when the word African comes up, what do you think of first or most, is omnipotent. This is Jay. He says omnipotent, as in super creative. I loved it. Global Black African Empowerment says his answer, or their answer, was essence of voodoo. I love that answer as well. So you guys can definitely chip in. You can chime in on these questions when these things come up, or when nice quotes come up. You can definitely chime in and let me know your thoughts on these things as well. As a matter of fact, it's through the comment section. Jay and I were having a bit of a conversation, I think under the last Shoot the Breeze episode, where we were talking about the African retention in music, in Caribbean music, and the fact that Caribbean music, and I dare say even Black music, Black American music, has actually gone back to the continent. Not only was it a retention, but it actually went back to the continent and influenced some of the music there. So that's what led to this topic being brought up tonight. Let me share the paper with you guys again, right? So it's through you guys' interaction with me that I oftentimes get my ideas of what to talk about on the show, right? So let's get into the paper. Let's get right into the paper. African Music Retentions in the New World by Lazarus E. Ekwueme. The perseverance of African culture among the Black peoples of Latin America, South America, the Caribbean islands, and the United States is a historical reality. The fact that this cultural inheritance spreads through the areas of religion, art, music, dance, drama, literature, oral and written, languages, and social morality has been established. What still may not have been fully exposed, however, and perhaps may never be satisfactorily explained, is the detail of the extent to which these carryovers or African retentions are present, even if in slightly changed conditions. The role of music in society of the Black man in Africa and in the New World is something that has been known to be much more significant in its functional aspects than it is with white people. Hornbostel was one of the first African specialists to observe this in print. In the life of so here's an excerpt from Hornbostel. In the life of the African Negroes, music and dance have a quite different and incomparably greater significance than with us, meaning Europeans. They serve neither as mere pastimes nor recreations. They are not meant to edify the mind aesthetically, nor can they be regarded as brilliant decoration on festive occasions or as a means of effectively staging ceremonies. Music is neither reproduction of a piece of music as an existing object, nor production of a new object. It is the life of a living spirit working within those who dance and sing. Although Horn Bostel was writing about Black people in Africa, the statement also applies more or less to all Black people, be they in the Aborigine villages of Australia, on the plantations of the West Indies, or on the farms of Georgia. Music serves the Black peoples of the world in all facets of human life, from the cradle to the grave, or more colloquially, from the womb to the tomb. So this paper was written in 1974, just so you know. And this brother Laz, he studied musicology, and I think his thesis, if I'm not mistaken, his thesis was on this very type of discussion, the African retention in music. I want to thank you guys for tuning in tonight. I know sometimes you guys are lurking quietly, but I want to thank you guys for tuning in. By all means, drop a comment. Let me know you're here. I'll shout you out. To continue, before the recent advent of the concepts of family planning and birth control, it was the wish of the Black woman to be married to bear as many children as possible. Songs at fertility rites in Africa and in Haiti still emphasize the prayer that the young woman conceive and bear a healthy child. A Black Louisiana housewife sings to her crying baby not too differently from the way a Jamaican mother does, or a Ewe woman in Ghana. The children's games, Ring Around the Rosie or Bob and Needle, each with its accompanying song, have counterparts in Africa, such as Ak Pakolo. I have to look up this Ak Pakolo. If you guys know it, drop a 1 down in the comments on the chat. Before I go on, I just want to point out, I mentioned this on, in fact, I screenshot a part of a discussion that was going on. And it tells you where we are. It tells you where we are as a society. So a Black woman was saying something along the lines of, you know, she was going to do something like OnlyFans or something to make money or something. And a Black guy, I don't know what led him to do it, but a Black guy said something like, yeah, you can do that and make good money. Because I think that's what she was saying. She was saying like, oh, I can make good money if I go and do OnlyFans. I don't need no dude to do anything for me. And some Black guy came along and said, yeah, that's true. You can make money. But in my opinion, that type of activity doesn't get you married. And she said something like, LOL, who cares about getting married or whatever? That's a lame thing to say because it's 2022. And a couple other Black females came on and said, yeah, this is 2022. You're not shaming us with that statement anymore. And the guy came back and he said, well, that's all well and good, you know, but you know, you don't have to want to be married or have children, but then you'll just die alone. And again, they laughed at the statement, but it just tells you, right? It shows you how far we've fallen from who we were. This paragraph lets you know. Before the recent advent of the concepts of family planning and birth control, it was the wish of the Black woman to be married and to bear as many children as possible. And now we have our women who don't give a damn because there's these outlets that allow you to circumvent, you know, any kind of companionship or whatever. And you could just do what you want to do and sleep around and all this old shit. And this is where we are now. We have a lot of work to do. Okay. Let me continue. Damn it. Let me continue with the reading. So the last thing was Africa has songs such as the Ak Pakolo, which I would like to look up, of Igbo children in West Africa, or the funny game song of the Kikuyu of Kenya called Rurururu Na Ingubiro, which is a special East African follow your leader version of Ring Around the Rosie. As soon as they are old enough to do so, Black children assist their parents in the day-to-day running of the house. They have their own special responsibilities. For the girls, It may be fetching firewood or drawing water from the village spring. For adolescent boys, it may be tending cattle or chopping wood. Both of those things, my grandmother famously told stories about when she was a little girl having to go fetch firewood and stuff. In Jamaica, one can today hear the singing of groups of girls on their way home from the farm with loads of cane or bundles of cassava stalks on their heads, just as one can hear the yodeling call of girls in the Ivory Coast in the early morning as they rush to the stream to draw water. The traditional African age group bands using local instruments may have been replaced by rock groups in the United States, calypso or steel band orchestras in the Caribbean, or high life bands in West Africa. But the idea of young people making music together with their peers still persists in Black societies. Now, again, this paper was in 1974, I believe. About 15 years ago, when I used to have a band, it was hard. It was really difficult to find a lot of people, Black folks, who were playing instruments. And right now, we have the brother Arthur, who's often in the chat for Shoot the Breeze, who's looking for peers, for bandmates to help him bring his musical ideas to life. And it's difficult. Oftentimes today, and this is something we got to think about as well, especially when we talk about African-centered curriculum and stuff. That music part is important. Because today, we don't really see guys practicing their trumpet or rocking the bass as much as we used to. Now, most folks are more so in the hip hop world and making, producing beats on a computer. And that, I'm not knocking that either. But to say to find folks who you could gig with or jam with instruments, real difficult these days. Just saying. Perhaps it is the area of work songs that the Black man's universal identity through the world manifests itself most vividly. He has had to work very hard throughout history, either toiling laboriously to eke out a living with primitive tools on overworked pieces of land, or sweating his life away in the mines, railroads, cotton fields, or sugarcane plantations for the enrichment of the white man, both in Africa and in the New World. The wonder that he survived the ordeal of slavery and colonialism and still triumphantly endures today the torture of forced labor in many places becomes less bewildering when it is realized that a lot of his sustaining capacity comes from the power of his song. Music becomes particularly helpful when a group of people work together and teamwork is needed. Not only does music act as a diversion, nay, a distraction from the burden of the work, but also it contributes to the coordination of energy in the unified teamwork in that action is tied up with the rhythm of the song, be it paddling a canoe, tugging at ropes, laying a rail, or slashing cane. In his book, Negro Folk Music, USA, Corlander summarizes the use of work songs thus. This is a blurb. The Negro work song, particularly the kind sung by railroad gangs, rustabouts, I guess that's stevedores, woodcutters, fishermen, and prison road gangs, is an old and deeply rooted tradition. Few Negro musical activities come closer than gang singing does to what we think of as an African style. The melodies may be essentially European. The rhythms may be simple, dictated by the nature of the work done, and harmonic sounds may be no more African and European, but the overall effect instantly calls to mind the group labor songs of Jamaica, Haiti, and West Africa. Prison songs are not limited, incidentally, to the United States. In Africa, with the advent of the European colonization and the erection of prisons in the European style, the tradition of employing music to make work lighter has naturally been adopted also for the inmates in those prisons run by colonial administrators. In pre-independence days, for example, prisoners were used in eastern Nigeria by the British administration to keep the areas around government offices clean. The grass was cut by hand with machetes that look rather long. That look rather like long. Hold on one second. rather long oriental sabers. Two or more prisoners were always picked out to beat a rhythmic tattoo with their machetes and lead the singing, while the rest, joining in the singing, slashed their machetes down to the rhythm of the music, cutting the grass with this movement. A popular song with prisoners for this kind of work is Onye Suru Achara Ib Ya Suru. I know I'm butchering it, whose meaning, let each man take his turn in cutting the grass, let none call another by names, emphasizes the basic Igbo philosophy of live and let live. This tradition of prisoners singing while working continues today and is taken for granted as being indispensable to forced labor. Religion is another area in which Africans share common heritage with their brothers in the New World, as evidenced in the similarity of modes of worship. Songs and rituals for the worship of Shango, for example, are today preserved in Brazil in almost the same unadulterated state in which they left Yorubaland in western Nigeria centuries ago. Today, there is such a universal tendency to associate or even identify voodoo with Haiti that few people know or care that the word itself comes from Dahomey in West Africa, where it means, quote, the spirit of protection, end of quote, called Voodoo in the Fawn language and voodoo in Iwe. Jean quotes the Haitian scholar Jean Price Mars, who recognized voodoo as a religion at a time when others dismissed it simply as a cult akin to sorcery. Here's a blurb. Voodoo is a religion because the initiated believe in the existence of spiritual beings who live partly in the universe, partly in close contact with men, whose activities they control. Voodoo demands a hierarchical body of priests, a community of believers, temples, altars, ceremonies, and finally an oral tradition, which has certainly not come down to us unchanged, but has fortunately preserved the essential part of the cult. Voodoo is a religion because out of the chaos of legends and distorted fables, we can extract a theology, a system of concepts with the help of which our African forebears explained in primitive fashion the natural phenomena, a system which laid the foundations for the anarchistic faith on which the corrupt Catholicism of the mass of our people rests. The music, dances, and occult rites associated with voodoo have equivalents in traditional religion in most parts of Africa. The concomitant ecstasy and quasi-psychical entrance upliftment capturing the minds and physique of participants achieved more through the medium of music than by any other means, have been adopted by Black Christian churches in the United States to the point that they are now what's this word again? Sine qua non in religious worship for all Black people. John compares this vital and overwhelming power of music in Black churches in America with the original voodoo. The importance of the genuine African polymetric foundation of this music is evident from a comparison with the forms of ecstasy that occur in North American Negro churches. Since the polymetric basis has been lost, the participants are no longer ridden by several loas, but only by one Christ. In the Negro churches, a collective state of possession occurs, while in Africa, several voodoons, or orishas, loas, never manifest themselves at one time, and the possession never leads to wild dances, but usually to a quiet sinking into oneself. Thus, in this type of possession, voodoo stands midway between Africa and the Negro churches. John, of course, got part of his information from other sources, such as Daw. Little did he know that in many indigenous African religious ceremonies, there can be and often is as much communal possession as there is in any Black church in the United States. Death is another great occurrence in the life cycle of man that has a special significance for Africans. Just as the birth of a child marking the beginning of life in this world is celebrated with singing and dancing, so does the termination of this cycle in death call for music and dancing, although a different kind, plaintive and poignant, that more vividly depicts this special stage in life, which, though accepted as the end of the mortal flesh of men, is merely a transition between life in this fleeting world and life in the spirit, eternal and transcendent. It is hardly necessary to discuss here the metaphysical philosophy of pre-Christian Black people. What is of particular interest is the role that music plays in the mourning and funeral rites of Black people throughout the world. Anyone who has seen the folk opera Porgy and Bess, or even the more recent film Uptight, again, this paper is from 1974, so has had at least a superficial exposure to the kind of singing and general music making in which Black Americans indulge as part of the funeral ceremony of a deceased relative or friend. These rites are similar to the all-night vigils that may last for days, sometimes weeks, at wakes or other funeral rites in rural West Indian homes or in African villages. Loved ones pour out their grief in lamenting sing-song. Many eulogies are sung extemporaneously by friends and relatives of the deceased. Groups of dancing men and women or masquerades, sometimes hired by families related to the deceased by marriage, perform intricate steps reminiscent of the vigorous life led by the deceased, or go through delicate contortions at the dirge that represent the grief borne by all of this death. How many of you agree with what's being said here? You know, me being from the Caribbean and seeing what is done, like in New Orleans, for example. You know, I see that retention there. To continue, these few examples should serve to indicate to some extent the importance of functional music in various aspects of African cultural life and in the cultures of Black people in the New World. Alan Merriam's comment about the use of song among the Hutu of Rwanda is relevant to this point. Here's another blurb. The Hutu in Rwanda, for example, recognize at least 24 general social song types, as distinguished from religious songs, including those played by professional musicians for entertainment, songs for beer drinking, war, homage to a chief, hunting, harvesting, and general work songs sung at the birth of a child or to admonish erring members of the society, to recount a successful elephant hunt, to deride Europeans, songs of death, vulgar songs, and others. You see, that's what I'm saying, right? We always had vulgar songs. Time and place, though. Time and place. You feel me? So I'm glad to read that in this paper here, right? Further within each of these categories, subtypes can be distinguished. Certain songs are sung when taking a new canoe from the place it was constructed to the water, when paddling against a strong current, or to make paddlers work better together. Let me ask you guys a question. This is something I experienced personally, right? When I have certain task to do, let's say I know I'm taking a drive through, a long drive along highways, or I'm driving to go do some serious work or what have you. There's certain music I have to listen to. If I know I gotta take one of New York City's public transit trains or something like that, there's certain music I need to listen to get through that. How many of you do likewise? Or there's a certain genre, certain type of song you need to listen to. Like in film, whenever these folks put these so-called Black films together, they always show Black folks when they're about to go do some demonic shit, shoot up a block or gun down someone. They always have to put on like rap music, hip hop, hardcore. How many of you have that similar experience where, depending on what it is you're gonna do, like for example, let's say you're gonna clean your house or your apartment on a Sunday or Saturday morning, there's certain music people listen to that's different from if you're driving across state or going to work in the morning. We got the learning curve here in the chat. Peace to the learning curve. That's the revolutionary matron. We also got Achieve Mindset saying hello. Hello to you too, Achieve Mindset. The learning curve says greetings. Earlier, the revolutionary matron said, music moves us everywhere we go. So yeah, so I guess that's the matron kind of agreeing with me. Different music or different moods or different types of tunes, depending on what it is you got to go do. And by the way, a piece to Achieve Mindset, he comes through on the panel on Shoot the Breeze when he can as well. He's over in the UK, so it's a little difficult for him, considering the hours of the night that we're doing it in America Eastern Standard Time. But much respect to that brother for coming through and showing love. Thank you guys for being here. Make sure you hit the like button while you're here as well. Let's continue. Where was I? So the Hutu are only one of the many peoples of sub-Saharan Africa for whom music plays many roles and serves many purposes. The Black peoples of the Caribbean and the United States, in spite of the impact of Christianity, urbanization, technology, mass communication, capitalism, and exploitation, and these forces can be quite devastating in their ravage, have continued nonetheless the tradition of employing music in their social and communal life, not merely a pastime, but as an instrument of life itself. Without music, the burden of slavery and after emancipation of second-class citizenship over the centuries would have been intolerable. Let us now turn our attention to specific musical relationships that exist in the music of the Black peoples of Africa and the New World. So this section is melody. Despite the acculturation of the Black peoples of the New World, certain features of African melody persist in their songs. The melodic line, for example, of the West Indian folk song Deo, otherwise known as the Banana Boat song, see example 1, has the shape of a typical African melody. Its highest point comes at the beginning, from where it gently works its way down to the lowest note at the end. That's interesting. Okay. Jones perceived this characteristic trait of African melody during his research and pointed it out when writing about the music of the Zambians. Here's a blurb. Broadly speaking, the outline of an African tune is like a succession of the teeth of a ripsaw, a steep rise, not usually exceeding a fifth, followed by a gentle sloping down of the tune, then another sudden rise, then a gentle sloping down, and so on. The tendency is for the tune to start high and gradually work downwards to this saw-like manner. You know, they mention a term here, ripsaw. How many of you are familiar with ripsaw music? Most people will say they don't know what that is. But if I mention rake and scrape music, maybe 2 more people might know that versus ripsaw. But it's a music that's completely African. So rake and scrape is from the Bahamas. It's our folk music. And ripsaw comes from that same or similar tradition where a saw is literally used and contorted in such a way while scraping the teeth. And it creates this beautiful sound. I wish Mr. Untouchable was here. He could also add, chip into it. But ripsaw is a style of music. You know, ragtime. The matron just mentioned ragtime. Ragtime is just like what he just described a second ago. Just like what we read a second ago. You know, after I get to the halfway point of the paper, I'm going to drop the link. If any of you guys want to hop on and comment to what I'm reading, you will be able to do so in just a few more minutes, all right? But yeah, you know, and it's important for us we all should have some of this musicology within us to understand what we're hearing too, by the way. To continue, Jones fails to point out, however, that each steep rise generally marks the beginning of a new phrase or sub-phrase in the song. Another particularly arresting feature of Afro-American melody is the blue note. Yep. That is the presence of the flattened third. I love that flattened third sound. And 7 degrees in the major scale. There's no doubt that the roots of the blue note lie in African music. Jones states, for example, that in his more than 20 years of residence in Central Africa, he had never heard an African sing the third and 7 degrees of a major scale in tune. This apparently inability to sing in tune derives, of course, from the fact that there is no such thing as a major scale in indigenous African music. African musical scales must be classified by a totally different system unique to them, rather than according to Western classes. Some work has been done in this regard, and there's a reference here that if anyone wants the paper, you could check out the reference. There are always to be found African scales that might be regarded as parallel to the major scale, except for their third and 7 degrees. It is precisely because of these two scale degrees that the African scale is unique. Each of the tones lies at a midway point between the major and minor intervals. Because of this, they are often referred to as neutral thirds and sevenths. Since these neutral tones were not present in the Western European scale, people of African descent in the New World who made music had to choose between the major and the natural minor or modal scales. That's something I used to practice that for hours every day, modes. Their compromise was to use thirds and sevenths that wavered between the corresponding tones in the two Western scales, hence the blue notes, not only in the songs called blues, but also numerous examples of spirituals, work songs, and other folk songs. In piano blues, the effect is achieved by striking the flattened and natural thirds or sevenths simultaneously. That's good information. Athrazer is here. He must have heard his name being mentioned. Athrazer says, "Ha, I can reference this whenever someone calls me, quote unquote, out of tune. Greetings, brothers and sisters," he says. Greetings to you, Athrazer. Thanks for coming through. Right? I figured this kind of topic would be of interest to someone like yourself as well. This is why. This is why when we have these low energy conversations about when we hear or encounter these low energy conversations about where these music types come from and this, that, and the other, and people say, hey, this stuff comes from the continent, this comes from Africa, and you have folks pushing back against that, you can reference this episode to those types of folks. I'm a guitar player. One of my favorite guitarists is Ali Touré. What's Ali's middle name? Farka. Ali Farka Touré, right? Who said it many decades ago. He said, when you listen to American blues music, it's nothing but African. But today, folks who want to push back against that, stop pushing back against that stuff, man. The learning curve says we are the tune. We don't sing out of tune because we are the tune. Janelle is here. Janelle says greetings. You'll say what's up to Janelle as well, right? All of this stuff is African. Let's keep it real, right? So hence the blue notes, not only in the songs called blues, but also numerous examples of spirituals, work songs, and other folk songs. In piano blues, the effect is achieved by striking the flattened and natural thirds or sevenths simultaneously. An important factor in defining the shape of the African melody is the close relationship between the tune and the words of the language. Many African languages are tonal, and the tonemy, that is, the rising and falling in pitch and inflection, is as important an element of the language as the morpheme or the sememe in conveying and determining meaning. Melodic lines tend to follow this natural linguistic feature of African speech, enabling the African to move easily from the realm of speech into that of song and vice versa. I want y'all to pay attention to what was said just now. Melodic lines tend to follow this natural linguistic feature of African speech, enabling the African to move easily from the realm of speech into that of song and vice versa. If you around my age, you could remember when dancehall reggae, dancehall music, when that first started, what was that really about? Song that went into speech and vice versa. You could go back and listen to old late 70s, early and mid 80s dancehall and listen to how they went back and forth between song and speech. If I'm lying, y'all tell me I'm lying. Right? Y'all tell me I'm lying. You know? Let's continue. Often the last syllable or word, and you know, by the way, I was checking out something the other day. I was checking out something in music in the Caribbean and how, like in music in the Caribbean, and I think this is just what it was. Wherever there was black folks, there was a time where we were rhyming, where we would just rhyme, like what would be the precursor to what's rap. I'm not saying that to take claim of American rap music or anything like that, but I'm saying it's a completely African thing. And I think we were kind of doing it around a similar times in our development, wherever we were. You know, I remember Zuli was pointing out something to me some years ago. He was like, yo, that rap stuff, you could go back in ancient Africa and find folks rapping, just like you find women twerking. Different, you know, fundamentally different reasons for, but you could go back, you could see the you could see the holdover, the carryover, right? Athrazer says, Ali Farak Toure, yeah, man, I was so happy to discover him in university. He says he just joined Mr. Mention. He says, always appreciate you promoting me. Rarely promote myself. Here's a song, My Mother, of course, about Mother Africa. So you guys check out that brother's channel. He's always putting up his performances. Check him out, right? Check him out. To continue, often the last syllable or word or entire phrase of an African song is spoken instead of sung. The slur, slide, or glissando that is common in spoken words reflects itself in the song words. Nor is this kind of music making confined to Africa. It can be perceived in the case of the Black American preacher who glides into song without a break at the end of his highly charged, emotionally intense sermon. Southern quotes from a description of early Negro singing in her book, The Music of Black Americans. What makes it all the harder to unravel a thread of melody out of this strange network is that, like birds, they, that is, the black singers, seem not infrequently to strike sounds that cannot be precisely represented by the gamut and abound in slides from one note to another, and turns and cadences, not in articulated notes. Abundant examples of this style of singing manifest themselves in the calls, cries, hollerings, whoopings, yellings, and yodelings of Africa, the West Indies, and the United States. This musical style involving spoken melodies also may be transferred to purely instrumental music, giving rise in jazz, for example, to such techniques as note bending, right? Examples 2 and 3 demonstrate similarities in the melodic character of a well-known Negro spiritual in the United States and a plaintive folk song of the Ekwueme of Ghana. So the next section is about harmony. Several so-called experts have claimed that there is no harmony in African music. Nonsense. What they probably mean is that African harmony does not obey the general rules, including tonic dominant relationships with classical Western harmony. Nkedia states that although Ghanaian music by tradition employs harmony, it is not the harmony of block chords built on triads or secondary chords and their inversions, or a system of progression based more on chord relationships rather than on melodic movement. Traditional African harmony has its own logic. You know, I'll tell y'all something, man. One of the things I wish I had done, I wish I had learned music when I was growing up back home, because the guys who were playing music back then, they really couldn't tell you what a major seventh chord was. I was watching a long time ago. I was watching this video of BB King. BB King is one of my musical influences. And I was watching BB King, and I was watching a young guy talk to BB King and ask him, is that a G major seventh? And BB King was like, I don't know what it is. All I know, it sounds good. Like those guys played from their ears, what they heard, and they could build these riffs and stuff in the music just off feeling and kind of knowing where they are on the guitar, where they need to slide to or bend to on the guitar to get to another aspect of the feelings. And I always respected that. There's a picture with the Beatles trying to study I want to say it's Muddy Waters. And one of the Beatles, I want to say it's George Harrison. You see him over Muddy Waters' shoulders. I don't know if any of you are big music heads like that, but if you are, you can drop a 1 in the chat. And I think it's Harrison who's looking over Muddy Waters' shoulder to look at the fingering of the chord that Muddy is making on the guitar. Because those guys ain't just using bar chords. If you know what bar chords are, do you know what I'm talking about? If you don't know, I apologize for talking music for a second here. Those guys, like myself, I learned from a book. I learned from, what's this white boy who used to make these books again? Mel, who's Mel? What's Mel's name again? Damn it, I forgot Mel's name. But you know, those guys know about making bar chords and how to transition from one Mel Bay. Thank you, Arthur Reserve. Mel Bay, right? Those guys know how to transition from one chord shape to the next or whatever. But guys like Muddy Waters, they ain't study nothing from no book, man. They played that guitar and learned what went with what sounded good. You understand? And these same white boys who many people, including black folks, tend to celebrate. They had to go around these guys like Muddy Waters and study just what the hell they was doing. And they couldn't even have the musical conversation. Like I could have a musical conversation. I imagine Arthur as well. I could have a musical conversation with the Beatles per se. But can I have a real musical conversation? I know he's deceased now, but can I have a musical conversation with BB King? Ooh, tell you, I don't know what the chord is. All I know, it sounds good. That's something from the spirit. And if you learn from the spirit, I tend to believe you tend to be a better player. That's just my 2 cents. The learning curve says singers do the same thing in choirs, especially. She says she typed 1. She's a huge music fan. Yes, me too. And Arthur, again, he finished my thought. He said it was Mel Bay. Yeah, those Mel Bay books were. Some writers have made casual references to the incidental harmony created as a result of the overlapping of solo and chorus parts in antiphonal African singing. Few, however, have discussed the special African harmonic logic or bothered to point out the similarity between African musical harmony and the kind of harmony found in the polyphonic music of medieval Europe and organum style, which, while not concerned with tonal relationships, does nonetheless represent a combination of different tones in quote-unquote vertical alignment, and hence is harmony. Indigenous African harmony recognizes the same natural overtone series out of which Western harmony, as claimed by Rameau and his disciples, is supposed to have grown. It must be pointed out that there has never been a truly convincing or justifiably successful demonstration of this claim. A vivid example of African awareness of the phenomenon and possibilities of the overtone series appears in a Nindo praise song of the Gogo people of Tanzania, recorded by Hugh Tracy. This song is performed by a mixed group of men and women singing in 3 parts. The women sing the same tune as the low-voiced men, thus setting the 2 outer parts in parallel motion, an octave apart. Okay. The middle part is taken by men with higher voices, who sing a part that basically follows the shape of the main melodic line, the outer parts, in similar motion all the way. But this similar motion is not parallel. It forms various intervals with the low voice that diminish in magnitude as the middle melody ascends. Thus, above the lower part, this middle part forms the intervals of perfect fifth, diminished fifth, perfect fourth, major third, and unison with the lower melody. If you don't know music, these intervals that they're talking about are like standards in popular music. Like in most popular music, the thing that you like about a song involves these intervals of perfect fifth, perfect fourth, major third, and unison. And if you do it the right way, like I was checking out this music production video on like pop music, and they were showing you how, like, let me find some white singers that people tend to like. Maroon 5, or what's the white girl who always sings those breakup songs? I can't think of her name right now, but they uses they use unison, where it's the same note, sometimes pitched up or pitched down, right? They use that like crazy. In pop music, they do this repetition, this repetition of notes. Let's say the song is in E, they'll hit that E note like what's the term? In syncopation. Like they'll hit that E note like at a beat. In fact, you know who's really known for that kind of stuff is Timberland. When Timberland makes his bass lines are in syncopation. They're like it's almost like he's playing a drum when he's making a bass line. So you could talk all that European talk about this, that, and the other, and how they make music, and their music is classical music and all that. The Africans are making similar music without all that jargon. Taylor Swift, thank you. Taylor Swift is that white girl I was talking about, right? Yeah, the intervals stand out particularly at resting points, which may be called cadences. At one point, a high note, notated on our score as D, is taken by a solo voice and comes in, interesting enough, when the men have converged in unison on a high note. When one takes an account of the notes employed in this folk organum, one discovers that they all belong to the overtone series, with the initial octave of the series represented in the parallel octave, singing between men and women. Moreover, the widest harmonic intervals occur at the lowest points and smallest ones at the top. Oh, that's interesting. Another phenomenon which emphasizes the order of the series as represented by the notes. So he talks about these examples here. I don't have the examples in audio, and plus I would be wary to play them, being that this is on YouTube. The occurrences of parallel harmony, guided by melodic scales, is characteristic of the natural African system of harmonizing tunes. The larger intervals, fourths and fifths, predominate in many African areas, while thirds, major and minor, sometimes neutral, dominate in others. So like I was saying, the third is particularly big in American pop music, in American folk music too. Percival Kirby has indicated that this kind of harmonization occurred in the singing of early slaves in the United States. It is still found in group singing among West Indians and Black Americans, as is evident in the singing of prison songs, gospel songs, spontaneous songs in Black churches, and even in many spirituals, especially those that have not been quote-unquote arranged by Western trained musicians. You know, I'll tell y'all something, man. When I was in college, I remember a Black guy, a dreadlock too, who was studying music. He was studying his focus instrument was guitar. He was studying music, like to get a degree in music. And I remember getting like some. This is back when I was practicing guitar heavy. I remember getting some sheet music, some notes or something from one of his classes. I'm trying it out, and I gotta tell you, man. You see this line that they just said right here? When Westerners, basically, when the music it has not been quote unquote arranged by Western trained musicians. Let me tell you something. That is such a huge point. That is such a huge point. Because when I tried to play some of the music that was his homework, I'm like, but all the feeling is taken out of this music. It's so mathematical and so arranged, and it's just it's kind of boring. If I'm honest, it's kind of boring. So this is why, by the way, this is why some of them white boys and stuff had to steal or copy black expressions in music, because the music that, let's be real, if Elvis was singing the music the way Elvis grew up knowing music to be in his White House household, Elvis wouldn't be nothing to talk about. Not that he is now, but he definitely wouldn't be nothing to talk about. If he wasn't just lifting the style of black folks, he'll be nothing, absolutely nothing to talk about. It doesn't translate well to us. You know, there's this white guy who used to sing a lot of blue-eyed blues, James Taylor. That worked. You know, that worked. James Taylor worked because James Taylor was doing what black guys were doing. Real talk. The learning curve in the chat says Jill Scott and many others do this better. Badu, Hill, Elliott. After quotes me, says it's so mathematical. Ha! People would say to me, I must be good at music because I'm good at math. I've never seen the connection. The feel of reggae is nowhere near a neat mathematical formula. You know what's interesting about reggae, officer? Reggae is so simple that it's complex. Reggae is so simple that it's complex. I remember watching this documentary about Island Records before Bob Marley and them really arrived. Bob Marley and them did a demo record in Jamaica. Sounds great, by the way. They sent the demo to England to, what's that guy's name? Chris Blackwell. And now I'll admit, Chris Blackwell as a producer, they were playing Bob Marley and them, what they did in Jamaica. And then Chris Blackwell pushes up the faders on what they added, and I got to give them man say credit. But one of the things I took from the story, hold on one second. One of the stories I took from the documentary, if you guys have seen the documentary, you let me know. One of the things I took from it, they got this studio, they got this studio guitarist, a white boy from Texas, to come and run the lead lines on the guitar over some of those Bob Marley songs. This is the album, what's that song in A minor again? Slave Driver. This is the album with Slave Driver on. And they got the white guy to come in. And this white guy couldn't find the root, or basically the key of the song. A big time studio musician. right? Couldn't find it. So it's so simple that it's complex. Arthur says, tell me about it. Some days I fall into a groove that feels so nice, so sweet. Other days I can't find it, and I don't even know where I have lost it. Let me tell you, a lot of popular Bob Marley songs are two chords. Two chords. And how they build the bass lines, the syncopation, the rhythmic way the bass lines are built, how the lead lines follow the bass line and interplay, just like this paper is describing. That's what makes reggae groove, especially roots reggae, groove so well. But I digress. So we're at the point of the paper that's called rhythm. You know what? Let me tell a station ID break here. We'll be back on the other side, and I'll continue reading the paper.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Have you ever considered joining KWAZ Radio? Each of our hosts shares their unique perspective with you. You might have a perspective that needs to be shared. If that's true, hit us up at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. What are you gonna do? What you gonna do?
Yes, indeed, and we're back. What I'm going to do is continue reading this paper. We're at a rhythm. So this might get a little bit, laden with music jargon, but just bear with me, right? So rhythm. Many rhythm patterns common in Africa are to be found in the New World. One of the most frequently occurring being one which may be notated thus, right? However, while this rhythm may often be played at about 96 BPM, in such a place as Cuba, in Nigeria, it is often played at tempos as fast as or faster than 144 BPM, which is pretty fast. The pattern is found all over Africa, throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, and in many parts of the United States, it has been called a bell pattern or a clap pattern. But here we shall call it simply rhythm pattern number 1, just as common as rhythm pattern number 2, but it is no longer and perhaps slightly more complicated, right? Both patterns use quarter notes in combination with dotted quarters, resulting in a proportional time value of 2 against 3. So like 2 against 3. What's the Cuban guy's name? I forgot his name. Son something. He this guy Bo Diddley was popular for that style beat too. The employment of 2 versus 3 in combination and sometimes in contradiction is a basic character of African musical rhythm. The presence of mixed rhythmic units of double and triple time and combinations of these and a counterpoint of rhythms contribute to that lilting, propelling force in the black man's music characterized as syncopation. Syncopation, the art, or one should say style, of shifting the accent away from the so-called strong beats and polyrhythm, the combination of 2 or more diverse rhythmic or metric units in different instruments or voices at the same time, are well-known features of African and Afro-American music. This is what I was talking about with reggae music too. Example 6, 7, and 8 show rhythmic similarities among a Nigerian folk song, a Negro spiritual, and a West Indian folk song. So form, what's form like? Ortiz Walton, in his short but thought-provoking article, A Comparative Analysis of the African and the Western Aesthetics, draws a parallel between Western art music, particularly symphonic music, and the assembly line in a factory, which is symptomatic of the Western cultural and economic dependence on technology. Each member of the symphony orchestra, like each member of an assembly line, does his own little part as a contribution to the finished product under the supervision of the foreman. That's an interesting analogy there. You know, the conductor. The consumer or concert goer, like his counterpart in the world of commerce, has been made into a passive recipient of various sounds. He either accepts the product or rejects it, but never is he allowed to add his own creativity to it. His response to the music comes in box office receipts, not in his active participation, as is the case in African music. Composers' names are like any other trademark signifying the quality of the merchandise. Some of these names are trademarks, or some of these names or trademarks are brand names, such as Mozart or Beethoven. They command respect and are used to polite company. So even though one has heard Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 for the 100th time, he still keeps listening to it, claiming falsely that he hears something new every time. His participation is limited to applause after the finale or occasional coughing during the sections played loud enough to cover the sound. Isn't that really true? That's a real good analogy there. Isn't that really true? Tanzan is here. Sister Tanzan joined us on the last Shoot the Breeze episodes. She says, peace and greetings, Koku. Y'all say what's up to Tanzan. Bobby E. Wright, ever faithful, ever sure. Bobby E. Wright says, great reading, Koku. I appreciate the encouragement, Brother Bobby. Right? Let's continue. In Africa, it is a thin line that divides the performer from his audience. Group participation is the norm. Even the folk stories told to children at bedtime have songs as integral parts of each story. Each song calls for the participation of the audience, the children to whom the story is being told, in response to the lead parts of the storyteller. This element of audience participation in African music has been transplanted to the Caribbean and the United States. Tell me about it. Antiphony, therefore, shapes the general form of the songs and instrumental music of Black people. The call and response form, in which a soloist or a small group of leaders takes a lead and the whole body of the group or the chorus responds by singing or playing the same melody or a different melody or corresponding or varying length, is very common. So also is the call and refrain form, in which the choral or group response is a standard unchanging refrain after each variable solo quote-unquote call. These two forms not only are very common in Africa, but also in the calypsos and folk songs of the West Indies and Latin America, and the prison songs, game songs, gospel songs, and spirituals of Black America. They are also preserved in the instrumental music of the three areas, in swing and other forms of jazz, in the steel bands of the West Indies, and in the West African high life. How many of you listen to high life, by the way? How many of you listen to high life music? Drop a 1 if you do. And the reason why I tell you guys to drop a 1 if you do, or 2 if you do, it's just easier for you guys. You don't have to go through a bunch of typing, right? This brings us to a section on instrumentation. The common denominator in the instrumental music of African peoples is the percussion. Although brasses may seem most popular in the United States, and the guitar may have become the chief instrument of the Calypsonian. Now, he said something that's real true there. The difference between, say, our folk music in the Bahamas, Rake and Scrape, and Calypso out of Trinidad, or what Jamaicans used to call Calypso back in the day. The difference between that and jab music out of Grenada, or Zouk out of Dominica and Haiti, is really in the strum pattern of the guitar. and the cadences in your strum pattern, right? But they're so close. That's the crazy part. Like, to be a guitarist who can play Caribbean music, all styles of Caribbean music, for example, is pretty impressive because the cadences change just slightly, just a half tone, if you will. It's just ever so slight, but it really changes the style of this and the sound of the music, right? African drums are not limited to membranophones. Many drums, such as the slit drum, are idiophones. Whatever the case, drums and drumming, the whole art of percussion, is of signal importance to Black people. The importance of quote, beating is highlighted in a paragraph in Leroy Jones's Black People, in which he discusses early Negro music making in New Orleans. Leroy Jones is the poet, if I'm not mistaken, Baraka, Amiri Baraka. Bobby Wright in the chat says one. He says, I downloaded a couple of 1960s Ghanaian high life albums last week. Beautiful. Beautiful. If you're going to re-Africanize, you got to re-Africanize. You have to refamiliarize, right? You got to listen to that music. There's an importance in that. And again, when you talk about African-centered curriculum, you better be talking about how we make music and how it's different than these folks' music. So here's the blurb in which he discusses early Negro music making in New Orleans. I have mentioned Congo Square in New Orleans as a place where African Negroes in the earlier years of slavery met to play what was certainly an African music. Marshall Stearns quotes an architect, Benjamin Latrobe, who visited Congo Square in 1819, quote, the music consisted of 2 drums and a stringed instrument. An old man sat astride of a cylindrical drum about a foot in diameter and beat it with incredible quickness with the edge of his hand and fingers. The other drum was an open stave thing held between the knees and beaten in the same manner. The most curious instrument, however, was a stringed instrument, which no doubt was imported from Africa. No doubt was imported from Africa. On the top of the fingerboard was the rude figure of a man in a sitting posture and 2 pegs behind him to which the strings were fastened. The body was a calabash, one which from the color of the wood seemed new, consisted of a block cut into something of the form of a cricket bat with a long and deep mortise down the center. Being beaten lustily on the side by a short stick, in the same orchestra was a square drum, looking like a stool, also a calabash, with a round hole in it, the hole studded with brass nails, which was beaten by a woman with 2 shorter sticks. The transmitting of messages for miles across the jungles of the Congo, the nostalgic tattoo in Congo Square in old New Orleans, the spontaneous beating on empty cartons and soap boxes in front of crowds, stalls in downtown Panama outside the Canal Zone. All these cases illustrate the importance of drums and drumming on the musical life of Black people in various parts of the world. Drums and other percussion form a large and important section of Black bands in the New World, and there's always an allotment of extended solos to this section of the band. Indeed, it would be difficult to think of a jazz concert without extended drum solos. Speaking of Athrazer, one of the things I always thought he would benefit from is a djembe drummer. Just get a djembe, start with a djembe drummer, and you'll see how significant that would be towards what you're doing. The art of percussion has been carried over to instruments outside the quote-unquote rhythm section, to instruments capable of melodic or harmonic articulation. It is our contention that this percussive instinct, apparent to the melodious xylophones of Africa, from the chopi in Mozambique to the malinke of Guinea, is echoed in such instruments as the vibraphones of Lionel Hampton, the contemporary percussive instruments of Quincy Jones, and the steel bands of Trinidad and other West Indian islands. This brings us to the section called Aesthetics. Aesthetics. Again, I want to thank all you guys who tuned in tonight. Make sure to hit the like button. Make sure do that for me. It helps, right? Aesthetics. Black music can be likened to the Christian sacrament. According to church doctrine, the sacrament is made up of two parts: an outward visible sign and an inward spiritual grace. Wow, that took me back. As there are different sacraments. Protestants say 2, Catholics claim 7. So are there several aspects of African cultural expression. For example, art, music, dance, drama, folklore, and literature. And again, when you're talking African-centered curriculum, and you're talking re-Africanization, these are the things you need to really be focused on as well. In addition to economics and all that stuff, this is what you need to be focused on as well. These various elements of culture are for the African all interrelated. And in some cases, several elements merge and become one and the same. Whenever there is cultural expression, it consists of at least 2 parts: an outward visible part, appealing to the visual senses, and an acoustic audible part, appealing to the oral senses. No one, whether in Africa or in the New World, goes to a musical event merely to hear Black music. People go to see it also. One goes to see as well as hear the carnival in Kingston, Jamaica, or Port of Spain, Trinidad. One goes to see James Brown, not just to hear him. People go to listen to the dancing of the Ballet Africain from Guinea, even when they perform in New York. That's a fact. The point here is that Black people do not make music, or for that matter, any creative art, for only one of the senses. A drummer is not just beating out rhythms. His costume, his facial contortions, his gestures are all part and parcel of his art of drumming. This extra acoustic or visible motion, which to the African drummer is as essential a part of his drumming as is the sound he produces, has frequently misled even good scholars into a wrong interpretation of African rhythm. Hornbostel, for example, erroneously explains syncopation in African music as resulting from muscular action. Each single, so this is a blurb from Hornbostel. Each single beating movement is again twofold. The muscles are strained and released. The hand is lifted and dropped. Only the second phase is stressed acoustically, but the first inaudible one, the motor accent, as it were, which consists in the straining of the muscles. This implies an essential contrast between our rhythmic conception and the Africans. We proceed from hearing, they from motion. We separate the 2 phases by a bar line and commence the metrical unity, the bar, with the acoustically stressed time unit. To them, the beginning of the movement, the arsis, is at the same time the beginning of the rhythmic figure. Upbeats are unknown to them. In the chat, Marcus McGee says to suggest a high life album to him. Bobby Wright, can you do that? Bobby Wright says Nana Ampadu, one of the big high life artists' music I've downloaded. Okay, KW Don 7 is here saying Sawabon, a piece of KW Don 7. Arthur said thank you. Houston looks like it just might provide a djembe drummer. Yeah, I'm telling you. Because you see, Arthur, as you know, I live in New York, and I know you've lived on the East Coast in the past as well. I look at these trained performers, you know, going back to when I used to play music. I look at these trained performers, and one of the things I notice, they damn sure make sure they are like linked up with some djembe drummer. If not a djembe drummer, what's the other drum? The Cajun drum, which is like a box, which I kind of believe they kind of mentioned in this paper earlier. You know, they always have those guys around them. So I think that will add something to you. Bobby Wright says African Brothers in Nigeria, 1977. So Marcus McGee, there goes one suggestion. African Brothers in Nigeria. And I'll tell y'all something too. This is my This is my fervent belief. You want to get black folks in the diaspora closer to their African selves, introduce them to the best African music, particularly West African music. It'll resonate with them, man. Trust me. Right? This novel but false theory has received support from other scholars, such as Black King, who unfortunately are not in a position to understand the philosophical, psychological, and aesthetic foundations of African musical syncopation. African dancers invariably wear rattles, shakers, or bells on their wrists, ankles, forearms, calves, waist, and wherever else appendages may be hung. These danglers do not, however, restrict the free movement of arms, legs, and other parts of the body, all of which take part in the dancing. Consequently, the dance, in addition to being seen, is also heard through the jingling of these instruments, as the smallest gesture or body movement is amplified in sound. In a similar way, the singers, Miriam Makeba, I was going to mention her too, Harry Belafonte, James Brown, could not perform. Their acts would be meaningless if they tried, without the movements and dance routines that are part and parcel of their individual acts, each of which is primarily intended for the air. Thus, there is in every Black cultural expression a two-dimensional aspect, but there is yet a third dimension which employs these two for its external manifestation, but goes far beyond them both in scope and in profundity. It is, in fact, the truly, quote-unquote, inward spiritual grace or force, although it is less pretentious than that of the sacrament. No word seems more apt to describe this intangible, burning, nay, consuming inward spiritual feeling than the one which has today become a household word, soul. Phil Garland has satisfactorily defined soul in her book, The Sound of Soul, at least its external attributes, saying, sometimes it is the gusty cry of a blues singer standing before a faceless but responsive audience of quote-unquote never hads and never wases, shedding its own private tears of conjugal misalliance through a song story, half talked and half sung. At other times, it is the sudden scream, the grunt, the wail of James Brown gyrating about a stage, dancing like a demon dispossessed, falling on his knees, projecting with all his movements and his rough-edged voice a mood of irrepressible joy. His presence is felt when Mahalia Jackson vocally embraces the phrase Lord of Love. I know Afrozer is big on Mahalia Jackson too. Mahalia Jackson and them used to do something with the tambourine. That's impressive too, by the way. Bending the notes with her incredibly rich black velvet contralto, and it is the solid thud of the good 200-pound Baptist sisters marching proudly down the aisle of many a black belt church on just that kind of Sunday morning as their strong but wavering voices proclaim, Jesus, I love you. You know, I'm not into that part right there, but I get it. I'm familiar with it. Something else he said here. So he mentions James Brown here. There's a James Brown song. I'm sure all of you guys are familiar with it. There's this James Brown song where it's called Please. James Brown doesn't do anything in this song but basically sing please. How many of you remember the song Please? Drop a one. That's one of my favorite that's actually one of my favorite James Brown songs. And I forget the venue, but there was a venue in America. This is when James Brown was starting to tear it up. And they had the Rolling Stones at the venue. Damn, I can't believe I don't remember, because this is one of those things I used to watch like all the time. I forgot the venue now. Now, James Brown was bigger than the Rolling Stones in America, but because, whiteness, they made James Brown open for the Stones. which was a bad move for the Stones because by the time James Brown and them finished doing their shit, even those white audiences didn't really want to hit Stones like that. You know, this is way back in the day when the Stones were real young and stuff. And one of the songs that James Brown performs in that set that absolutely slaughters is that song, Please. And, you know, you guys can look it up, man. I see Bobby Wright and the Revolutionary Matron are familiar. They typed one. That song is so simple, but James Brown kind of acts out the sentiment of the song, like falls to his knees, and he has I forget my man's name. He died a couple years after James Brown. I forgot his name now, but that guy came out, dropped the cape over James Brown. James Brown rises up and starts to it's one of the best performances you can check out. Real talk. So you guys look it up. If I want to say, let me see if I can look it up quickly. And the Rolling Stones. What's that called? Yeah, it's if you type in James Brown Rolling Stones, it comes right up. It's one of the first videos that comes up on YouTube. I mean, powerful, powerful, powerful. Bobby Wright says, Coco, it was in 1964 in Santa Clara, California, I think. You could be absolutely right. The venue had a popular name. Like, the venue had a very popular name. I can't think of the name of the venue now. But, I mean, James Brown kills that shit. I wish I could play it. James Brown kills it. But anyway, I digress. Phil Garland's concern is primarily with the sound of soul in the United States. There is no doubt, however, that the origin of this spirit was in the homeland of Africa. The similarity between gospel singing in black churches of the United States and the traditional choral chanting of the Zulu in present-day South Africa shows the affinity in feeling and aesthetic expression among black people many thousands of miles apart. That Hugh Masakala is warmly received in Harlem, and James Brown's records are bestsellers all over Africa as they are in the United States. That Paul Robeson, Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, and Duke Ellington are popular in the Caribbean as Lord Kitchener. Listen to that. Kitchener comes up again. We mentioned Kitchener on Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze, I believe, right? Lord Melody and Mighty Sparrow are in Africa. These facts are evidence of that unity of origin, that common experience of exploitation and subjugation, that capability of adaptation and survival under virtually impossible conditions, yet that intransigence in the preservation of sound, basic inherited practices of art and culture, all of which go to identify the black man, unique and distinct from all other races in the universe. No man is an island unto himself. The black man cannot and should not live in isolation. He cannot escape the tremendous influences exerted by the economic and political forces of Western civilization. He must draw from cultures other than his own for the further enrichment of his own. He must continue to adapt to changing conditions in order to survive in an ever-changing world. But his strength lies in the power of his unique identity, which has reasserted itself in the New World despite the separation by colossal waters, and which has withstood the bondage of slavery and the yoke of imperialists. He must continue to preserve his heritage, whether his present abode be in Africa or the New World. And that's the end of the paper. That's the end of the paper, right? So one of the early references was to another Laz work, Igbo choral music. It's theory and practice. Right? If you guys like this, let me know. If you guys want the paper, just hit me up. You can email me. You guys know the email address. It's right there for you to see. You can email me on the About page of my YouTube page, or if you're on the Discord, just hit me up and ask me for the paper. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you did or if you didn't. Right? But that's the African music retention in the New World. If you'd like to hear me talk about this this type of topic again in the future, in terms of African music and how it's represented in our music out here in the diaspora, I'll try to figure out a way to do it where I don't get dinged for playing other people's music. All right. I see the Learning Curve says great show. Thank you for that. Bobby Wright surprises me again. He says Black Stalin and Mighty Sparrow are my guys. Man, that's good to hear. Bobby Wright is from New Orleans, by the way. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? We can do this, man. When we talk about re-Africanization, we can do this, man. We can do this. You just have to open up yourself to it. Bobby Wright is telling you, he's talking about Black Stalin. I actually know Sparrow's daughter. I know her from college. Shout out to Sparrow, by the way. The mighty Sparrow. And I'm telling you, if you sit down and listen to some Sparrow music, like people talk about Bob Marley, rightfully so, I get it. People will talk about Peter Tosh, but listen to some Sparrow music from back in the day. I'll throw out one easy one. Go listen to Gene and Dinah and check out the political commentary in that song. Arthur said he thoroughly enjoyed it. Sent it to a few friends. Beautiful. I appreciate that. Bobby Wright says, great show tonight. I appreciate all those kind words from you guys. I hope to be back on Thursday. I'm way behind on those Thursday shows. I need to organize that better. I was supposed to drop the link here, right? I forgot to. Sorry about that. But definitely, let's come back for Shoot the Breeze on Saturday. Let's come out strong. Bring your folks, and let's get those numbers up. Check out the other shows on KWAZ Radio. Check out the Pro Black Perspective, the Learning Curve, as well as the Harsh Rally Podcast. If you know folks you think should be on this network, this KWAZ Radio network, let us know. Oh, and shout out to African Think Tank for the nice shout out he gave to the Bitter Medicine Podcast to his listeners. I saw a few new subscribers since that time, so I appreciate that, brother. I got to return the favor, do a video tribute to that brother as well. I'll be back later in the week. You guys make sure to give it a thumbs up today. I'll see you guys soon. Until next time, you guys be good and peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.